On Saturday, the 14th of June, 1777, the Continental Congress, then in session in Philadelphia, adopted a resolution which reads as follows: Resolved that the flag of the 13 United States be 13 stripes, alternate red and white, that the Union be 13 stars white in a blue field representing a new constellation. The Journal of Congress is silent as to the name of the member or committee that introduced this resolution, and neither is there any record of the discussions that may have preceded the adoption of that national emblem. It is a matter of great regret that no record of the circumstances attending the birth of the Stars and Stripes has ever been found, for we should like to know who designed the present flag, and also, though a matter of less interest, who made, that is, manufactured, the first one. Betsy or Elizabeth Griscom was the fifth daughter of Samuel and Rebecca James Griscom and was born January 1st, 1752. She was married when quite young to John Ross, son of the Reverend Aeneas Ross, an Episcopal clergyman of Newcastle, Delaware, whose brother George Ross became one of the signers of the Declaration of Independence. George Ross was interested in the furnishing of cannonballs, with perhaps other military stores for the colonial defense, and it was while on guard at night over these that the nephew, John Ross, Betsy's first husband, received an injury from the effects of which he died in January 1776. It was during her widowhood that Betsy Ross is said to have made the first Stars and Stripes. Betsy Ross died in her daughter's home in Philadelphia, January 30th, 1836, aged 84. The earliest history of the national flag was written by Captain Schuyler Hamilton, United States Army, and published at Philadelphia in 1853. Captain Hamilton makes no mention of Betsy Ross and does not give to any one person or group of persons the honor of designing the American flag. The next history was written by Ferdinand Sarmiento and published in 1864 during the Civil War at Philadelphia. Sarmiento, like Captain Hamilton, does not mention Betsy Ross and does not credit the origin of the flag to any one person or to any committee or group of persons, but considers honor due to many individuals who assisted, more or less, in the development of the flag. No mention of Betsy Ross occurs in any history of the United States or in any of the many biographies of Washington prior to 1870, 93 years after the flag was adopted. In that year, however, William Canby of Philadelphia read before the Historical Society of Pennsylvania a paper on the history of the American flag, in which he stated that his maternal grandmother, Betsy Ross, was the first maker and partial designer of the Stars and Stripes. Canby said that Mrs. Ross received a call in June 1776 from General Washington, Colonel George Ross, and Robert Morris, who told her they were a committee of Congress and wanted her to make a flag from a rough drawing they had, which drawing upon her suggestion was redrawn by Washington in pencil. This was prior to the Declaration of Independence. Mr. Canby claimed that he had heard his grandmother tell the story when he was a boy 11 years old, and that 3 of Mrs. Ross's daughters, then living in 1870, and a niece, aged 95, confirmed his statements. The best and most complete history of the flag of the United States of America was written by Rear Admiral George Preble, United States Navy. The first edition was published in 1872 and the second, revised edition, in 1880. Rear Admiral Preble gives Mr. Canby's story about Mrs. Ross in full, and he considers it probable that Mrs. Ross did manufacture, or have manufactured at different times, flags of the United States of various designs. His conclusion, however, is that it will probably never be known who designed the Union of Stars, the records of Congress being silent on the subject, and there being no mention or suggestion of it in any of the voluminous correspondence or diaries of the time, public or private, which have ever been published. If Mrs. Ross made a flag in an Arch Street house as claimed, it was made after a design that had been conceived and born somewhere else, and her contribution was no more than the labor that is given by anyone in a flag manufactory. Even according to the paper, which was read before the Historical Society in 1870, it is admitted that a design made by someone else was taken to her, but that she made some changes in it. The Canby claim is practically charging Washington and the rest of the committee with seeking to establish and set up in June 1776 a national ensign before we had declared ourselves a free people on July 4th of the same year. And without any delegated authority to do so, the record of Congress being silent on the subject. What became of the flag that Betsy Ross is said to have made in June 1776? In all the engagements that took place between the American and British troops from June 1776 to August 1777, there is no record in existence, public or private, that the flag claimed to have been designed by Mrs. Ross in June 1776 was carried. The first time that the Stars and Stripes was carried by American troops was at the Battle of the Brandywine, September 1777. The annals of the American Congress do not say that any committee was appointed to design the flag. Washington made no note of a visit to Mrs. Ross's house, although he was a voluminous letter writer and kept most detailed diaries, and his writings do not contain a word that suggests when the first United States flag was made or designed. Neither do any of the distinguished historians of the Revolutionary period give us light on this question. Newspapers of Philadelphia, issued at that time, did not chronicle any portion of the story as told by Mr. Canby 93 years after the flag was adopted by Congress. Mrs. Ross did make state colors for vessels and batteries prior to June 14, 1777, but it was not until after the Stars and Stripes were ordained that she became a government flag maker. The people are very apt at setting up idols of one kind or another and at manufacturing heroes and heroines. That Betsy Ross was a good woman and an industrious and competent seamstress is entirely probable. The evidence that General Washington Robert Morris and Colonel George Ross called upon Mrs. Ross in June 1776 and asked her to make a flag from a sketch which they showed her, that Mrs. Ross suggested alterations in the design which the committee accepted, and that she made a flag from the modified design, which flag was a year later adopted by Congress as the national ensign, is entirely hearsay evidence. It is based solely on statements by Betsy Ross's descendants as to what they heard her say. This evidence would not be accepted in a court of law, and therefore it is not proved that Mrs. Ross either designed or manufactured the first American flag.